Stapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharma swarupine avatara varishtaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha. O Ramakrishna, establisher of universal religion, the embodiment of all religions, to thee, the noblest of divine incarnations, I offer my salutation. This prayer of reverence to Sri Ramakrishna marks something that happened in the 19th century. You can take Sri Ramakrishna as a great mystic or a divine incarnation, or you can take him as a holy person, whatever, and in whatever way you take him, the fact is he was unique and remarkable. Having explored in an open way, with a great spiritual thirst and curiosity, every possible avenue open, and arriving at the same conclusion, he was able to declare that all religions and all paths are true. And the saintliness of this person, the divinity of this person, showed itself in so many different ways. Like a shining lamp, enlightening the world, like Buddha before him and Jesus before him. And 5,000 years ago, possibly Krishna and Rama and so on. These great waves come from age to age and transform the whole way that we think, the whole of our religious experience, and leads us in the way of contemporary spiritual life on a contemporary spiritual journey. Contemporary because every age has its own different needs. And so we call this the prophet of the modern age. And if it's something like a big light, a big lamp, we would expect small lights to come out from it, or other fires to be lit from this one flame. And so it was with the inner circle of Sri Ramakrishna. These giants of monastic members who gathered around as young boys, the older Ramakrishna in his late 40s and 50s. He was 50 years old when he went into his Mahasamadhi. And these young boys were students, but they had all one characteristic. They had the mark of an inner circle because they had great yearning. And Sri Ramakrishna could see by simply looking at them, he could read their previous life and could read therefore their future potential. Today we are celebrating the tithi puja, or the birth anniversary of one of these shining lights, Swami Abhedananda. Swami Abhedananda, otherwise called Kali Prasad Chandra. This is how he was born. He was born on the 2nd of October, 1866. And the remarkable thing about his life was the insight that Sri Ramakrishna saw on meeting Ramakrishna for the first time, because he had been inspired to try to understand the Vedantic philosophy and to try to be a yogi. How can I be a yogi? Now, there's a famous book that later came out entitled that by the Swami Abhedananda, How to Be a Yogi. And in lecturing various Hatha Yoga groups, I picked up this theme, how to be a yogi, and it reminded me only recently, oh, actually there's a book like that he wrote, How to Be a Yogi. Because the great Swami Vivekananda, his Guru Bhai, his brother, he wrote individually on all the 4 yogas. But there was no real synthesis or obvious synthesis. Swami Abhedananda provides this. And why should he do so? He did so because he was deemed to be a great, great scholar. In his very youth, of course, his parentage, his father was a senior teacher of English at an educational institution called the Oriental Seminary in Kolkata. And his mother was very pious, praying to Mother Kali, may I have a pure son. And so she was provided with Kali Prasad, the gift of the Mother Kali. And so it's no wonder that in later life he becomes a bright luminary in the spiritual firmament of India itself. He was known to be somebody who had rapt attention, listening to the great inspiring stories that the subcontinent of India always has to offer, with the theme of spiritual life and spirituality, embodying all the noble qualities of heroes and heroines. On Saturday mornings, we study this one group of heroes and heroines in the story of Rama. But he was gifted with a kind of genius for philosophic contemplation. And even as a boy, he began to interest himself in solving all the various intricate problems of life. And we see here a kind of characteristic that has a questioning mind, a scientific mind to it. In his later life, we find him in the United States of America. And there we see him in a debate or a discussion with the great, great scientist William James, lasting many, many hours. And the Swami impresses all the intellectuals of his day with his brilliance. But his desire to become a philosopher was greatly stimulated when he read for the first time a book. It was Wilson's History of India. And there he saw that Shankaracharya was the propounder. For the first time, he came across the Advaita system, the non-dualistic system of philosophy, the highest conclusion in Vedanta. And this changed his life, or it opened a new chapter of inquiry. It acted as a stimulus. And of course, his perusal also of the Bhagavad Gita also served only to intensify even more the yearning that he had to follow in the footsteps of the great Acharya Shankaracharya. And so all along, this ever-increasing thirst for acquiring spiritual wisdom teaches us that really the first quality we need to nurture and light within ourselves is a yearning for truth, a yearning for spiritual wisdom. After all, the word philosophy means love of wisdom. So his intellectual knowledge, his studying the masterpieces of great savants of his age, both remarkably of East and West. He studied these, and at a tender age, he had finished reading all the abstruse books of his day. John Stuart Mill's book on logic, 3 essays on religion, Herschel's astronomy, Gounod's physics, Lewis's history of philosophy, and Hamilton's philosophy. But he also read the great Eastern works of Kalidasa, Bhavabhuti, Bhanabhata, and all the other eminent poets of his own land. And so we can see he has a prodigious intellect, something like an extraordinary genius. It was this genius that was tapped into when, in 1896, Swami Vivekananda invites him across to London to carry on the work that he had started there, and that gave Swami Vivekananda the freedom to go back to India. he had advertised in advance with great leaflets and great fanfare, excuse me, the arrival of this great Swami who he praised. The only problem was Swami Abhedananda, Swami Abhedananda, I should say, was completely unaware of this. And he'd never spoken either to the Indian people or the Western people. He'd never spoken to anybody in public. And so when he arrives in London, he protests. And the Swami gives him a remarkable encouragement. Actually, it was something like a prayer. He says like this, he tells him in response to this invitation, the talk was on Advaita Vedanta, and it was to be held at the Christo Theosophical Society in London. And of course, he was taken by surprise and therefore extremely nervous. And of course, his name was flashed, as I said, amongst all the handbills of that time, no internet in those days. And he was sorely perplexed and became extremely nervous. Such a great yogi became so nervous. He'd never before done anything like this. But the Swami told him this, and it's like a prayer. Depend on him who has ever given me strength and courage in all the trials of my life. See, Swami Vivekananda, in his mission to the West, and indeed in India, had suffered many, many trials, from his father passing away, leaving the family in financial difficulties, to the death of his sister, to his observance of poverty in his own country, to the distress that occurred to him in his wanderings, and finally to his trip to the United States of America, where he was unsuitably clothed, where his finances became limited, where he was laughed at and ridiculed for his foreign quaint dress, all these kinds of things, not to mention all the people who were jealous of him and scandalized against him and gossiped against him. And in fact, when later Swami Abhedananda goes to the United States of America, he's suffering the same thing. But these are the words of courage. Whatever trials we have, we can depend, that means we can have faith on that one who has given us all strength and courage. These are great, great qualities without which we can do nothing. And relying entirely on the infinite grace of his divine master, Sri Ramakrishna. Wherever we spread our wings, wherever we propagate the Vedanta philosophy, I think we always have to bear this in mind. It requires strength. It requires courage. Pioneering work is difficult. It requires a unique type of person. But how do we get through it? We let go and we invite the infinite grace of the Master Sri Ramakrishna to come through. The yearning for knowledge led him ultimately to Ramakrishna. He had noted in the Hindu philosopher Shashatha, who had expounded the 6 systems of Hindu philosophy, and he had heard and was impressed about the system of yoga, espoused by Patanjali. Every Tuesday evening, we study these. And of course, in this, you learn about the infinite possibilities of the soul. But you see, he is warned that even though you have a study of all these things, and you want to search for a suitable teacher, which is necessary, because you are told that to follow the methods described, even in the Yoga Sutras, without the proper guidance of a competent teacher or a competent preceptor, was really dangerous. You're really exploring unexplored territory. Much better to take a competent teacher who can guide you through all the possible pitfalls and misdirections of spiritual life, of mystical life. And so in looking for this, he wanted to find a real yogi who could teach him how to attain the very highest superconscious state called Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the crowning glory of a human's spiritual experiences. And it so happened one of his classmates with whom he had discussed the matter told him of Sri Ramakrishna, and so directed him to go to the great saint. And so that made Kali Prasad very restless to see the master. Now he makes an effort on one occasion to go to Dakshinaswar. He does this in middle of 1884, and Ramakrishna passes away in 1886. And that means that even having discovered his master, he's really only with him for about 2 years. But what a remarkable thing happened in those 2 years. Anyway, he goes to Dakshinaswar and finds the master is not there. He's gone to Kolkata. But he meets a young man, Shashi Maharaj, that is Ramakrishna's disciple as Swami Vivekananda. And they discuss together, and he gets food and so on. And the master comes back 9 o'clock at night. At 9 o'clock at night, he meets the master. He goes in to the master's room. He makes the necessary prostration and salutation. And Ramakrishna immediately understands him. He tells him 2 remarkable things, most remarkable things, almost unique. Firstly, you were a great yogi in your previous life. Secondly, this life is your last life. Imagine now going and somebody with such a great insight and mystic experience as Sri Ramakrishna, somebody who is the absolute perfect embodiment of spirituality and spiritual life, the ocean of wisdom, and tells you, firstly, your previous life, you were a great yogi. That means this journey that you're continuing now is a continuation of that. Secondly, this is your last life. And another remarkable thing that happens, Ramakrishna had a peculiar way of giving mantra diksha, a peculiar way of infusing a disciple with spirituality. He wrote the mantra on his tongue. He gave him there and then the mantra, and then touched his chest. The touch of the chest, like as in so many cases that we read about in Sri Ramakrishna's life, was had a transforming effect. It was like an electrical current that transformed his life. And he became a great meditator. And all throughout his life, he had this capacity to become indrawn and meditate. And like other monks, he, of course, served the master in his illness at Kashipur Garden House, and then took monastic vows with his others, and entered into the Baranagore monastery, a rough and ready building that they used as a monastery. And there he would often spend times by himself in his own room, deep in study or meditation. He was a person of that type, a spiritual introvert. And yet he had such charisma. We see later how he influenced others and how he impressed others. He is the only disciple of Ramakrishna whose voice we have heard. And we have heard it in a radio broadcast of 1937, the celebration of Ramakrishna. And there, on the radio, for the first time, we hear a speech. It wasn't long after that his demise occurred. And so, like other brothers, he then left the Baranagore monastery, something like the headquarters that people would go away from and come back to, and barefoot wandered. He wandered around the whole of India, up to the Himalayas, up to the various sacred places throughout India. And there he learned more. And if we can say almost 10 years or so passed while he was engaged in this wandering phase of his life. And there he meets some significant scholarly people in his life, some well-known spiritual characters. In other words, no matter that he studied and sat at the feet of his master, he still looks forward to attain this freedom in this life. And this whole approach changes because Swami Vivekananda goes to the West with a brand new vision. Instead of monks wandering around here and there, looking after their own freedom, looking after their own pursuit of this nirvikalpa samadhi, this liberation, a much higher state is there. And the lessons of the master has to be distributed everywhere. And we have to be of service. Being of service to man is the highest expression, the practical expression of this Vedanta philosophy. And so for the first time, Swami Vivekananda organizes a new order of monks in India. Monks that are now behaving more like Christian friars, concerned with the social welfare and the upliftment of all of those downtrodden in his native India. Of course, we understand so far he was a great scholar and also a great yogi. The call of the forest yielded even more experience. He walked in his wanderings up to the sources of the Ganga and the Yamuna, and he spent most of his time in contemplation of the Absolute, visiting sacred places, Kedarnath, Badrinath, Hardwar, Puri, Dwarka, Rameshwaram. All of these are in different places within India, going to the extreme south and the extreme north. And while he was there in Rishikesh, a particularly holy place, I last visited fairly recently. It's now become a very popular spiritual tourist place. But there he made a special study of the Vedanta under a celebrated monk, Swami Dhanaraj Giri. And this was a man who was noted for his profundity of scholarship and was well versed in the 6 systems of the Hindu philosophy. So this rich and varied experience of this itinerant life made him eminently fit to serve humanity, and so the call of Swami Vivekananda in 1896. We have seen how he began his life, his ministry in the West in a shaky way, but for 25 years, half a century, he spent mainly in America, sometimes visiting other countries in Europe, and all the time talking, all the time lecturing, all the time spreading the message of his master. Even during his stay in London, he had formed the acquaintance of these distinguished savants known to us today as deep thinkers and Indologists such as Professor Max Muller and Paul Deussen. And his eloquence and his lucid exposition of the Vedanta philosophy, and above all, his depth of spiritual realization. See, we can hear people talk many, many things. Today we have YouTube and we have many, many avenues through various media. But you see, real impact that people have is from somebody's spiritual realization. The person may be a very poor speaker. The person may be even silent. But spiritual realization is infectious. It's contagious in a good sense. And so, wherever the Swami went, he made a profound impression on everyone who came in touch with him and listened to his illuminating lectures. People who heard him in London remarked on this, and they remarked of how even if I perish, says Swami Vivekananda himself, even if I perish on this plane, my message would be sounded through these dear lips of Swami Abhedananda, and the world would hear it. Captain Sevier, great devotee of Swami Vivekananda, he made this observation: Swami Abhedananda is a born preacher, and wherever he will go, he will have success. So far in studying his autobiography, or his biography, I should say, we see him as a profound meditator, somebody of profound, deep spiritual insight, somebody who is by nature introverted, somebody who is a scholar, somebody who has read profoundly all the avenues of thought, east and west, somebody who studied science, a well-educated man who can hold his own in any environment, be it intellectual or be it those spiritual seekers looking for something, some deep, enlightening insights. But here we see how he is born as a natural preacher, able to convey his message, a natural preacher. And so Swami Vivekananda was extremely confident in the ability of Swami Abhedananda to continue his work. And then, of course, in 1897, a new chapter opens where he now goes to America, to New York, 9th of August, where already, of course, there's an established center. Of course, when he arrives, we can see some of his trials. He was almost penniless and had to work hard to push on the work. And by dint of perseverance, self-confidence, unflinching devotion to the Master, he was soon able to create a field for himself and tide over the swarm of difficulties that surround him in the initial stages of his work. Now, everything I'm saying to you, I should point out, is taken from Swami Gambhirananda's excellent book, initially coming out as The Apostles of Ramakrishna, republished as The Disciples of Ramakrishna, expanding the scope of his work. And so I'm quoting much from this material. Anyway, we see that he was, like every successful person, subject to obstacles in his work, and his success was soon excited jealousy, the jealousy of the Christian missionaries who began to fabricate scandalous lies to bring the Swami into disrepute. It is a burden that we often have to carry, that people like to gossip. And this gossip is never kind. It is always malicious. Sri Krishna tells us in the Bhagavad Gita how there is a threefold set of disciplines. Tapasya, the discipline of speech, involves us to be kind, compassionate, but also to leave a person enlightened, to leave a person more joyful. Supposing we go and talk to people and leave them in a better mood. This is the very opposite of gossiping. So he had to suffer all of this, but nothing daunted him in his work. And he had this usual great vigor and sang-froid. And soon he was acclaimed as a great exponent of Hindu thought and culture, and was invited to speak before a number of learned societies. And he was a profound scholar, as we mentioned before. His incisive intellectual powers, oratorical talents, his charming personality, he made him popular. And so, for example, at the Mott Memorial Hall, he had to deliver 90 lectures to satisfy public demand. And even the great savants of America became greatly impressed by his intellectual brilliance. We have mentioned his conversation previously in 1898 with Professor William James. And this discussion really was about the unity of the ultimate reality, a topic still a buzz topic in the scientific and intellectual community today. And it lasted for nearly 4 hours. And Professor Royce, Professor Langman, Professor Shaler, Dr. James, the chairman of the Cambridge Philosophical Conferences, they all took part in this. And Professor James, he was finally forced to admit that from the Swami standpoint, it was impossible to deny ultimate unity. But he still said, I can't believe it. In most of his lectures, we see his emphasis that comes out in his teachings. Cultivate purity of thought, spirit of love for all, irrespective of social status or caste or creed or nationality. And whether we believe in God or not, says the Swami, whether we have faith in prophets or not, if we have 4 things, self-control, concentration, truthfulness, and disinterested love, that is generous love for all, then we are on the way to spiritual perfection. On the contrary, if one believes in God or in a belief or a creed and doesn't possess these 4 things, he's no more spiritual than an ordinary man of the world. In fact, his belief is only a verbal one. This is relevant then, it's relevant today. These 4 factors are necessary. It doesn't matter in an age where people are debating and talking, having lost faith in a kind of creator God. But you see, he was able to impress that there is one principle, an unchangeable substance. He was able to convince people that in addition to researching the external world, we should also research the internal world. And this is the unique characteristic of Indian thought, a unique characteristic of the Vedanta philosophy, that it is a living philosophy. If it's just dry intellectualism, then it means nothing. And the scientists, even after a careful scrutiny of natural phenomena, have arrived at certain conclusions, which are like conclusions in which nothing is concluded. So the latest findings of science then and now is that the ultimate goal of everything is unknown and unknowable. There's very little we know, actually, about the fundamentals of life and nature and the cosmos. Here, Vedanta comes to the rescue, telling us about the solution to these mysteries and advises the students to study not just merely nature, but our own internal self or Atman. And then, having explored that, we really have the answers. We have the most fundamental answers to the most profound questions. And he was able to convey this. And he was able also to quote from different sources. His appeal was that he could convince people by quoting what they favored: Huxley, Tyndall, Spencer, Kant, and so on. He also traveled extensively, not only throughout the United States, but of course Alaska and Mexico also, delivering lectures everywhere and in also parts of Europe. And he was not only a powerful speaker, he was also a very prolific writer. And if his spoken words molded the lives of hundreds of people, his printed thoughts influenced even a wider circle of people. His writings contained deep philosophy with a great wealth of information. Anyway, after long and successful work, Swami Abhedananda returned to India in 1921. And he visits many, many different places, and he has many different adventures. He went on a long tour as far as Tibet and Kabul, and he writes some interesting reports of his travels, including the curious investigation into whether Isa or Jesus visited Tibet. He returns to Calcutta in 1923, and he carries on the Vedanta work in his own way. So he established the Ramakrishna Vedanta Society in Calcutta, and there he attracted many, many people. And as I say, he leaves his mortal frame ultimately on the 8th of September, 1939. He passed into the realm of the eternal bliss to enjoy well-earned rest, because all of this work broke his health down at a very young, a reasonable, what is in contemporary terms a young age. In his, 57 is when he returned to India. And so, what were some of his teachings? What would we expect? His teachings are a reflection of his master's teachings, like all the disciples. Their teachings are simply different reflections of the master's teachings. This is a rich resource because it shows us more deeply different approaches, different angles of what the master taught. Practice to be like the kitten, he says, calling on their mother, and remain with joy and satisfaction in the place and state in which she, the Divine Mother, puts you. Complete resignation to the will of the Divine Mother is what is wanted. You must become ever joined with the Lord, wholly without any distraction, he says. Pure and absolute, single-minded devotion to the Lord is what you should cultivate. This is a curious presentation from a man who was a great yogi, but also seemed to be more inclined toward the absolute, more inclined towards the Advaita philosophy, more of an intellectual bent. And here we see his promotion of the devotional path as a practical, real path set out for a great number of people. He says, unless one has inner peace and contentment, one will find restlessness and suffering wherever one goes. Raise a wall all around your mind, and by your discrimination, do not allow the distraction of external circumstances to enter your mind. Know this, that it is spiritual practice. You cannot find in the world any place after your heart. Learn to turn unfavorable circumstances into favorable ones. The mind is all in all. You cannot hear the rumbling sound of the carriage if you withdraw your mind from your ears. Keep to your helm and pray to the Lord. He is our help and our mainstay. Now, if you want a summary of some of his teachings, I recommend the book that I've just been quoting from, and that is The Apostles of Ramakrishna, or republished as The Disciples of Ramakrishna. And then, of course, there's a comprehensive, much more comprehensive and detailed biography in the book God Lived With Them, The Life Stories of 16 Monastic Disciples by Swami Vivekananda of St. Louis. And so what do we find ourselves on this occasion? We find ourselves celebrating a life of a great hero, and may that hero inspire us all with his life and teachings. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thank you.